the brave, home of the free. Sorry about that, got a frog in my throat. Yes, we're looking at the American Revolution today.
Okay, although I'm talking about America today, what it's really about is how the history of how a country was created gets turned into a legend about the inevitability and awesomeness of that nation. The thing is, if we're talking about the formation of France or England or China, it all happened so long ago that it's very hard to take away the fact from fiction. But if we're talking about a relatively new country like America, then we have plenty of evidence to show that things weren't perhaps as star-spangled, awesome, or straightforward as the narrative that's increasingly coming to be popular is. Let's take, for example, the year 1776. That is the year that the American story seems to start from, and yet it doesn't. People talk about the Boston Tea Party being a key point leading up to the Declaration of Independence. That's true. It was, however, as the American history books point out, a wanton act of destruction. The destruction of legitimate boxes of tea being thrown into Boston's waters. It happened, however, in 1773. That is 3 years before 1776. So should we start in 1776 or 1773? The other thing is that 1776 was the Declaration of Independence. That started a war between American people in America and American people in America and French, who didn't like the Brits, and the Brits, who didn't like the French or the American people in America that wanted to become independent. You see, it gets quite complicated. But bottom line, nothing was independent in 1776. That's the start of the war. The war finished in 1783. It's quite a few years later. And that's not as commemorated.
The American Revolution was not a case of English soldiers in red jackets blundering around the forests of Virginia being shot at by brave rebels. That occasionally happened, but it's worth remembering that it was George Washington, who was an ex-British officer, had fought in the 7 Years' War on Britain's side against France, looking to the French. And Louis XVI was only too happy to help and assist these American rebels because it was against his main enemy, the British Empire. And at this stage, Britain had made an error. They didn't have any continental assistance from likes of Prussia or Russia or Spain, which allowed France to use all its resources to stir up troubles in the American colonies, supplying them with arms and an entire navy at certain points. The simple fact and uncomfortable fact for Americans is this: America would never have become independent without France. Indeed, at the final battle or siege of Yorktown, about half the troops there were French, and it had been surrounded by the French Navy. So America owes a huge debt of gratitude to France. It's important to note that in 1783, when America did go independent, more than 100,000 American citizens moved to British-held Canada, so not everybody wanted this.
If you know your history, and many Americans do, none of what I've just said is all that controversial. But the problem is the media, and particularly Hollywood, doesn't like complexity. And increasingly you're seeing bad red coats being destroyed by plucky rebels more and more. The French are slowly getting airbrushed out of the story, which isn't fair and isn't what happened. But, as I went back to the beginning of this piece, they're not the only ones to do this. And whereas we know that this isn't the way it happened in America, how much do we not know about how France was formed, or England was formed, Spain, etc., 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 yeah? So with that thought, beware nationalism. It's very rare that what you hear or what you think you know is actually what happened.
My apologies to any American viewers. If you want more, as always, you can find @HistoryGems on Twitter and on Facebook with daily posts. But don't forget, there's also The Busy Person's Guide to British History, now available on Amazon. See you soon.